Hello everyone and welcome back. Today I'll be continuing to read Black Panther, the Young Prince. So let's continue. Chapter 8. T'Challa opened the door to the embassy room. "I'm exhausted," he said as he stepped inside and closed the door behind him. "Tell me about it," M'Baku agreed. "I feel like I just ran 30 miles in the forest." "The jet lag should wear off soon," T'Challa replied. "My father said we should stay up as late as we can the first few nights to get acclimated." "Hey," M'Baku said, "what's this?" Several shopping bags had been placed on both boys' beds. T'Challa picked up a note card on the pillow. "Thought you boys might need some Chicago gear. Clarence." "Clarence?" M'Baku asked. "The concierge," T'Challa reminded him. "Oh, right," said M'Baku. They tore into the bags and found winter coats, thick socks, t-shirts, wool caps, and gloves. After a lot of back and forth, they both settled on the pieces they liked most. "Now we're ready for Chi-Town," M'Baku said, posing in front of the mirror. "We are," said T'Challa, but wondered exactly what that meant. The first few days at Southside Middle School went by in a rush. T'Challa was swept up in a whirlwind, memorizing students' and teachers' names, finding the right classrooms, and getting oriented to a completely new environment. "I can't believe we got all this homework," M'Baku complained one night at the embassy. Books and papers were spread out all over the bed, along with several empty potato chip bags. "We'll get used to it," T'Challa consoled him. "Just give it a little time." "Easy for you to say," replied M'Baku. T'Challa didn't have trouble with any of his classes. He had learned a lot at his father's knee. And then there were his tutors, of course, who were well versed in everything from ancient civilizations to advanced robotics. "I'll help you," T'Challa offered. "What are you having trouble with?" M'Baku screwed up his face. Everything?" A few days later, T'Challa found himself sitting in French class, poring over verbs and sentence structure. It was gray outside and the room was cold. He wished he had brought a sweater. "And who can give me the correct conjunction of the verb to be?" asked Mrs. Evans, the French teacher. She sat behind her desk and surveyed her students. The classroom fell silent, except for the sound of pencils tapping against wooden desks. T'Challa had already answered several of her questions, and now he had a choice to make. Should he give her the correct answer, or wait for someone else to give it a shot? Silence. T'Challa waited and waited. Mrs. Evans sighed and rested her chin on her fist. T'Challa raised his hand. Mrs. Evans' eyes lit up, something that happened every time he answered a question. "Yes, Mr. Charles?" T'Challa gave a little cough, a nervous habit he seemed to have picked up as soon as he arrived in America. "The verb to be," he began. "Present tense."
Je suis, tu es, il est, nous sommes, vous êtes, ils sont.
Mrs. Evans shook her head in what T'Challa thought could only be admiration. "Your enunciation is excellent," she said.
Très bien, Monsieur Charles. Merci.
The smile fled from her face as she returned her gaze to the class. "As for the rest of you, study lesson number 2 again. We'll be having the same drill again tomorrow. Class dismissed."
À bientôt.
The silence was broken by scraping chairs and groans. T'Challa revived a few sidelong glances and smirks as people left the room. He couldn't help that he learned French at an early age. It was the national language of several African nations, and his father's visiting dignitaries used it when they greeted him. It was something he had to learn, the duty of a prince. Nice job, T. T'Challa turned. It was the girl from the bus, the one who had sat next to M'Baku on that first day. You're an exchange student, right? She asked. From Kenya? Yes, T'Challa answered. I'm Sheila. I think you met my friend Zeke already. Oh yes, T'Challa said. Zeke. He helped me get started on my first day. Me and my friend Marcus. There was a moment of silence as the students filed past them, all talking and jostling. What's school like in Kenya? Sheila asked. T'Challa studied her face for a moment. She had tiny freckles, nutmeg brown skin, and large corkscrew curls. Well, it's different. It's a little bit more... He searched for the right word, but came up blank. Disciplined? Sheila asked. Yeah, that's it, T'Challa said. Sheila turned to the sound of kids shouting. It is a little rowdy here. So how'd you get so good at French anyway? Well, there are a lot of French speakers in Africa, so I learned when I was little. I wish I learned when I was a kid, Sheila said with a hint of envy. Conjugating verbs is the bane of my existence. T'Challa smiled. He could already tell that Sheila was definitely smart, someone he could be friends with. Actually, Sheila said, I'm more into science. The natural sciences, to be exact. Ah, like energy and matter, right? Sure, but don't forget biology and natural phenomena. T'Challa was impressed. He'd heard that American students didn't like to study, but Sheila put that rumor to rest already. They stood in silence for a brief moment. Well, T'Challa said, it was good to meet you, Sheila. You too, Sheila replied. See you around. She's nice, T'Challa thought as she walked away. Maybe it wouldn't be too bad at Southside Middle School after all. A few minutes later, he wasn't so sure about that. The gymnasium smelled like dirty socks. It was large with a high ceiling, from which hundreds of small lights shone down. Several banners hung from the walls, each showing a roaring tiger on a field of green and yellow. Wildcats, T'Challa whispered. Seems like you'll fit in, M'Baku joked. You know, cat family. T'Challa cut his eyes at him. I'm gonna show these kids how it's really done, bragged M'Baku, cracking his knuckles. How what's done? T'Challa asked. I don't know. Whatever it is they think they're good at. T'Challa laughed. M'Baku certainly wasn't lacking in confidence. After getting changed into their gym clothes, courtesy of the embassy, T'Challa and M'Baku fell in with the rest of the boys, forming a line. A loud whistle blow brought the class to attention. A man who was built like a fire hydrant, short and squat, but all muscle, walked down the line with a clipboard and surveyed the students. New year, new recruits, he said. Some of you won't be able to hack it. Some of you will cry, and some of you may faint. But believe me, when you leave here, you'll be better men for it. There were a few muffled snickers, but the instructor ignored them. M'Baku shot T'Challa a glance and rolled his eyes. My name is Mr. Blevins, the instructor said, and today we're going to learn the fundamentals of one of the world's oldest sports. He paused. Wrestling. M'Baku smiled. He and T'Challa had wrestled from an early age, and the two of them were about equal in their skill. Now, Mr. Blevins said, I'm going to show you a few basic moves. But first, I need a volunteer. Any takers? Silence. The students dropped their hands and shuffled their feet, squeaking their sneakers on the hardwood floor. T'Challa was reminded of his French class. He was never one to back down from a challenge. Being the son of the king meant he had to prove himself to the boys who thought they were better than he was more times than once. He stepped forward. M'Baku gave him a grin. A few of the students eyed him with curiosity. The new boy, Mr. Blevins said in surprise, sizing T'Challa up. He glanced at his clipboard. T. Charles. Well, Mr. Charles, let's do this. T'Challa gave a weak smile. Do you know the referee's position? Mr. Blevins asked, tossing his clipboard to the floor. I do, said T'Challa, and dropped to his hands and knees. It was one of the first things he learned in Wakanda. Mr. Blevins took the advantage position and knelt on one knee, then placed one arm around T'Challa's middle. He rested the other on his elbow. Now, Mr. Blevins said, his voice carrying through the gymnasium. On 3. Mr. Charles here is going to try to escape. Ready? T'Challa released a breath. Ready. 1, Mr. Blevins counted off. 2, 3. T'Challa spun around on his knees and flipped Mr. Blevins on his back, pinning him to the mat in less than 5 seconds. A chorus of "Ooh!" went up from the crowd. Mr. Blevins' eyes were still wide when T'Challa rose from the mat. Well, Mr. Blevins said, getting up with a wry smile, I haven't been taken down like that in years. That was quite, effective, T. Did you learn that in Kenya? T'Challa paused. Everyone was staring at him. Whispers filled the gymnasium. His mouth was dry. I did, he finally said. My father taught me. Mr. Blevins brushed off his knees. And what does he do? T'Challa swallowed. A lot of stuff. M'Baku covered his mouth with his hand, stifling a laugh. Ah, Mr. Blevins said. Looks like you'll have a head start on the rest of us then. He turned and addressed the class. That's what I call team spirit. Wildcat spirit. Wildcat spirit, the class shouted back. T'Challa grinned inside. He was off to a good start. But as he turned around, he saw that one boy in particular was staring right at him. And he was smirking.